Yeah, we will be taking a look at another hypothetical 2024 presidential election hypothetical prediction, which is what if the United States had a 100% voter turnout rate? Now, as far-fetched as this may seem for some people, some countries force all registered voters to end up voting, and if you don't vote, there's actually a fine or some type of penalty. So if the US had that and 100% of people voted, what would the election look like? Now, first off, let's give some background information as to voter turnout. This was the 2020 presidential election voter turnout. The U.S. had a extremely high presidential election turnout for that year in 2020. We see that some states, which are generally more competitive, had higher voter turnout, which is typically higher than 70% on this map. Interestingly, all states that had a higher than 75% voter turnout were all states that Joe Biden won, something that's interesting to look at. That generally supports the point of view that with states with high voter turnout, which means if all voters end up turning out, the results would be more favorable for the Democratic Party. The states with the lowest voter turnout were generally all Republican states, with the exception of the state of New York. Now, another interesting aspect to look at that is the CNN exit polling. Now, you can say that the exit polling wasn't very accurate, but if you look at this, if you vote for your president mainly because it was for your candidate or against his opponent. When you say against his opponent, you essentially say, I don't really like either of these candidates. Most people who chose this option, if not the vast majority, the lion's share of these voters, probably said, you know what, I don't like either candidate, but one candidate is worse than the other. Typically, when you don't vote, there's one of two things that could be happening. Either you think your state is safe, red or blue, so your vote doesn't matter, or you're not interested in either candidate. But because Trump is the more controversial candidate, and because he is probably going to be the Republican nominee in 2024, this hypothetical scenario will hurt Donald Trump because, well, people who don't like either candidate, if they are forced to vote, they're more likely than not to vote for Biden. With all that in mind, let's start off with the likely states for both sides. For the Republicans, we still have the generic likely states, South Carolina and Alaska. These are states that, regardless what's going to happen, even with 100% voter turnout, going to vote for Donald Trump. Now for Joe Biden states, we're just going to assume Joe Biden's going to be the winner here for the Democratic Party. The state of Maine here right now, the state of Virginia, Colorado, New Mexico, nothing surprising there, both of these states likely for the Democratic Party. And I think as well as that, because I did previously explain that Democrats are probably going to do better in this hypothetical matchup, I do think that New Hampshire as well as Nebraska 2nd District will go to the Democratic Party. Again, I say high voter turnout generally benefits Democrats for the reasons I listed previously. Now going to some of the other states here. I also think that Minnesota will be a likely Democratic state if voted for Biden by 7, same in the state of New Hampshire. Now I also think the state of Michigan will be a likely Democratic state. Now many of you might disagree, but just because of the reasons I just previously explained, high voter turnout typically means good things for Democrats. Well, not necessarily good things for Democrats, but good for the candidate that is more moderate, who may be able to appeal to more voters if everyone was forced to take a vote. In this case, Trump is the more controversial candidate. Now, going to the lead Republican states, I still think Iowa, Ohio, both of these states will still go to the Republican Party. That's not surprising, right? Trump won both of these states in 2020 by about 8 percentage points, slightly more than 8 percentage points in both of these states. And as well as that, the state of Florida. Florida is the state that's going to vote for Trump, even with 100% voter turnout. Florida, either way, in 2020 had more than 2/3 turnout, higher than 70% turnout, in fact. So more or less, more voters are turning out in the state of Florida, so it wouldn't make that much of a difference. In fact, high voter turnout would probably not hinder Trump's chances in a state like Florida, where many rural voters are actually the ones who are not turning out. Now, as well as that, we're probably also, again, we see the state of Florida in the lead Republican column. Maine's 2nd Congressional District in 2020 had also a very high voter turnout. So I think in this scenario, that would not hinder Trump too much because the district already had a pretty high voter turnout. Now going to some of the remaining states here. If there was 100% voter turnout, I think Democrats will certainly win the election. They're going to win the state of Wisconsin, they're going to win the state of Pennsylvania. And the reason is, if you look at both of these states here, there was already pretty high turnout. These are competitive states. These are states where voters generally believe that their vote matters than some of the other states which are less competitive. However, if you just take a look at the results of both these states, they had higher turnout from 2016, and most of those new voters ended up really, they didn't support either candidate. Many of the voters who voted in 2020, not 2016, these were voters that did not like either candidate, generally speaking, but voted for Biden, quote unquote, being the lesser of the two evils. In this case, all the voters will have to make a decision. And if they have to make the decision, they're going to vote for Biden over Trump in most of these cases. As well as that, the state of Nevada and the states of Arizona, both of these states had lower voter turnout than some of the Rust Belt states. They had pretty much mediocre turnout compared to the rest of the United States. I do believe that both of these states will vote for Biden in this scenario. I also think the state of Georgia too. When we see higher voter turnout, you're going to see Democrats do a better job. Now, if you go to the state of North Carolina here, there was pretty high turnout here, which means that voters were more energized to vote. In the state, it had about 73% of turnout. So the results wouldn't be hindered by that much. Nonetheless, I do think that Democrats, especially black voters, who turn out generally less than white voters, if everyone had to vote, they would definitely back Biden by a substantial margin. And that's another reason why Democrats have benefited in this scenario. Black voters historically, although the gap has shrunk in recent years, still had lower representation in terms of the vote, which means that there's lower black turnout than white turnout. And when everyone is forced to take a ballot, that is very good for Democrats because black voters will obviously vote for the Democratic Party. Typically, African voters, as well as African American voters, as well as voters of other races such as Hispanic, Asian, those are voters that are going to more likely than not back a Democrat. Finally, for the state of Texas, Texas had a low turnout in 2020, at least compared to some of the other states that had about 62 to 63% turnout. In this scenario, I think that Texas would still probably go to Republicans, so it would be extremely close here. The reason being that many rural voters who turn out will still vote for the Republican Party. But again, there are, generally speaking, in these scenarios, it's going to be favorable for Democrats, but not favorable enough for them to win the state. Anyways, thank you for watching. Have a nice day. Goodbye.